Welcome to Rewind Toys. I'm your host, Jason Emmett, and this week we're going to be taking a look at one of the larger lines, in more ways than one, here on the show. Known affectionately to collectors as MOTU, the line is actually called He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, and today we're going to get into just how this sword and sorcery line found its roots. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. Mattel, obviously one of the big hitters when it comes to toys. We've mentioned them here on this show several times already, from early hits like the Magic 8 Ball and Barbie, all the way up to Muscles and the Toy Story line. Mattel has been making lines we all know and love for a long, long time, but in 1976, someone at Mattel made a really bad call. See, this dude named George Lucas had just released some little film called Star Wars. Maybe you've heard of it, I don't know. Anyway, they were shopping around, to find a company who could produce action figures, and Mattel was actually offered the Star Wars line, but they turned it down. There are a number of reasons why they turned it down, but you need to understand at this point in time, no one knew what Star Wars was, no one knew if it was going to succeed, and toy lines based off of movies didn't do that well. Now, eventually, Kenner would pick up the Star Wars line, and well, I think we all know how well Star Wars ended up doing for Kenner, and if not, eventually we will chat about it here on the show. So over the next couple of years, Mattel, they had to sit back and watch as those damn Star Wars toys would sell hundreds of millions of units and rake in the moolah for Kenner. Now, Mattel tried a few toy lines in hopes that they might work and make them some money. There was Robin and the Space Hoods, Kid Gallant, but nothing seemed to make a dent. They needed something to recapture their heyday. But what? I mean, that was the question. They considered trying to cash in on another movie line, but nothing out really looked promising. Plus, if it were an original property, they would have more freedom to do with it what they want, and they wouldn't have to pay licensing. All right, so the first step to this problem was to figure out what kids actually wanted, and what better way to do that than with a marketing team? I don't know, I guess it worked though. Using images of various, shall we call them hero types, they polled kids between the ages of 5 and 10. There were things like cops and astronauts, accountants. I think my notes might be wrong here with the accountants thing. I don't think that was one. And most importantly, there were characters that offered more of a, shall we say, fantasy element, namely barbarians. Now remember, folks, around this time we had Thundar the Barbarian, Conan, Clash of the Titans, Quest for Fire, Black Star. There were a whole bunch of them in the 80s. Now the genre was hotter than a buff dude in a loincloth. So why not strike while that iron is hot? They also figured out that kids really love the idea of, having power. That's right, 80s parents. We kids were tired of being pushed around, and stuff like that. Okay, so they know they want barbarians, and they want something to do with power, but they need someone to design this thing, and so they turn to a man named Roger Sweet. So Sweet was a lead designer for Mattel, and Sweet had been really impressed with these paintings he'd seen by a man named Frank Frazetta. Frank Frazetta. We're going to stick with that. And here are but a few of those paintings. Inspired, Sweet knew he wanted a real kind of sword and sorcery vibe, but he also knew the only way to truly sell his idea was with something tangible, not just some stupid old pictures. He grabbed a Big Jim action figure, posed it into something he considered cool, and started adding clay. Now, once he was happy with the design, he created a cast, and then he made 3 different prototypes. The main figure had jet black hair and deeply tan skin with a helmet atop his dome. Later, they would make him a bit more clean-cut, change the hair to blonde, and they would ditch the helmet altogether. Now, they needed a name. Now, Sweet has said he jotted down nearly 50 different names trying to come up with one, stuff like Big Man, Mighty Man, and Megaton Man. And then he wrote the word He-Man. And like magic, he just knew He-Man was the way to go. So Sweet's original concept for this toy line was massive. He wanted the line to be able to exist like anywhere in any timeline, from like low-tech warriors to futuristic machine men. Also, those prototypes he made, they stood like 9 inches tall. Now, personally, I don't think the line would have succeeded had they stayed that big, and according to Sweet, it was just a way to drive the idea home. He never intended for them to be that big. He just really wanted them to represent when he showed them. Now, I want to read a direct quote from Sweet regarding his initial idea versus what became of it. And I quote, "The way I conceived these guys, they were very gutsy. Later on, a lot of different designers got their hands on them and made them much more preschool-y or weakened line in other ways, but my original prototypes were 3 huge tough guys. My concentration was to make the thing appeal as much to adults as to kids. The line evolved to younger when I would have preferred it more adult, like Star Wars or Spawn, which appealed to collectors as well. It would have had a much broader base. If you design something really gutsy and appealing to a man as much as a boy, little kids will love it too." Now, personally, I don't agree with this statement. I think He-Man was just the right blend for the time. Also, something to keep in mind, collecting, like he mentions there, wasn't really happening in the 80s like it does today. And honestly, I'm just not sure the line would have gone anywhere had they not marketed it the way they did. No boy, did they market it. Now, before we go on, let me say one quick thing here, and then we're going to leave it alone. According to Sweet, he was influenced by Frazetta's paintings, some of which were of the Conan character. But Sweet says he was not directly influenced by Conan. There was a lawsuit. They did not win. You can decide on your own if it was a warranted lawsuit or not. I'm just saying. You can. It's up to you. I'm going to tell you what to think. So yes, they did tone down the prototypes and they started creating these characters. But make no mistake, Sweet was not alone. There was a whole team working on it, and in that team was a man named Mark Taylor. Mark Taylor was integral to helping with the appearance and the final characters. Taylor claims he made up the Skeletor character based on a haunted house ride from when he was like a kid, and while Battle Cat was a reused Tarzan toy, Taylor came up with the paint scheme, added the armor, the saddle, and the helmet. Oh, and the first packaging designs, those were his as well. So now we have a new action figure line. It's time to start reaching out to retailers, right? Well, yes, and they did, but this was the 80s, and there was something Mattel should have done, but they didn't do it. So they're meeting with retailers when one of the retailers asks a very, very simple question. What media is there to help promote the toys? Now, this doesn't seem as much a thing today, but I would also say with the lack of awesome cartoons for today's kids, there aren't as many cool new toys. We Gen X and some of the Zennials and the like are buying most of the toys up, and we're happy to do so. But as I said, this was the 80s, and in the 80s, you needed, well, something. A comic book, a cartoon, some way to help introduce your toy line into pop culture. Now, Mattel, they hadn't considered this at all. They were on the spot with this question, so they did what any good salesperson worth a shit would do in this situation. They lied. Without any hesitation whatsoever, they told them that a comic book series was already in the works. Now, that little lie led to one of the coolest features behind the MOTU line, a mini-comic that was placed inside the packaging, written by Donald Glut and illustrated by Alfredo Alcala. The comics were slightly different than the story delivered in the cartoon, which we're going to get to here in a second. Now, at first, He-Man was depicted way more barbarian-like. It showed a world devastated by war, leaving behind technology and weapons, but thrust into a more primitive state. There were also rips, like in the fabric of time and space, that allowed beings to come from other dimensions, one of those beings being Skeletor. Today, these stories are referred to as Mini Eternia or Savage Eternia. All of that changed with the second wave, where they were tuned a little closer to the cartoon. Now, from 1981 all the way up through 1987, there were 6 series of MOTU figures released, and there were 49 mini-comics released. There was also an actual comic book series released. DC, Marvel, Image, they all had at some point actually done some of these. There were actually more companies that have done Masters of the Universe as well. So let's chat briefly about the cartoon, or as we like to call it, lie number 2. See, the cartoon wasn't in the works either, although they told retailers it was. They had already released the first wave of toys along with the comics, but retailers wanted more promotion. Mattel, they were like, yeah, of course, did we not mention the cartoon series? And with that, now they needed a cartoon series, and that meant they needed help putting it together, so they turned to Filmation. Filmation had been around since the 60s, and they had a long line of action cartoons under their name. There was like The New Adventures of Superman, there was Star Trek, the animated series, The New Adventures of Batman, there was Black Star. That's just to name a few. There were a bunch more. They also have a history of liking, they like add the New Adventures in front of stuff, and it's just a Filmation thing. Filmation was known for producing a lot of stuff really fast. It also didn't hurt that Filmation founding member Lou Scheimer was a fan of the barbarian aesthetic that He-Man brought with it, and he actually really wanted to work with Mattel on this project. So the storylines were then kind of shifted to fit a younger audience, with the characters and the history first defined by screenwriter Michael Halpern, then later reworked by Tom Ruegger. They came up with the idea of Prince Adam, for example, and He-Man's ties to the King and Queen of Eternia. That was all sort of, invented by them. Luckily, we had the toys already, so coming up with a look for the cartoon series, that was simple enough. This is probably one of the biggest reasons why, for the most part, the He-Man toys actually look like their cartoon counterparts. So the cartoon was, it was massive, right? And to a young boy in the early 80s, it was one of the best things we had ever seen. It also worked. It worked really well. The first year the toys were on the market, sales were around 38 million, which isn't bad. But by its peak, after the cartoon, sales had skyrocketed to over 400 million. It also gave Mattel an awesome vessel from which they could create new characters and new vehicles and the like. So with all this success, what happened? What happened to the line? It's He-Man, which we all know never fully went away. There have been several attempts to breathe new life into it. There was The New Adventures of He-Man, which took place in space, and there was a 2002 reboot that wasn't horrible. It lasted a couple of seasons. There was a retooled, and again, not bad in my opinion, 2021 Netflix series that ran 3 seasons, and there was Masters of the Universe Revelation, also Netflix 2021, that ran 2 seasons as a continuation of the original series. Now we have a new film in the works, which is looking okay thus far. We'll see. Initial news was kind of scary, but it's not looking bad right now. So I guess we need to talk about the toys themselves for a minute, don't we? MOTU toys were great for playing with, and they're also great for collecting. They came in a 5.5 inches sort of figure made up of hard plastic. They were rugged, not as flimsy as some other toys on the market. Articulation was in the shoulders, the neck, the waist, and the hips. So again, you could pose them and stand them really well. The earlier figures only had 2 different molded chests, 1 pair of shorts, and 3 sets of arms and legs. They would mix and match parts for different characters, repaint them, things like that. Later on, that was changed, but you might still see similar parts on different dudes. Now, I cannot list all of the characters here because the original classic run was over 200 figures. I will list the very first wave, though. 1982, there were 8 figures. He-Man, Man-at-Arms, Teela, Zodak, Stratos, Skeletor, Merman, and Beastman. We also received Battle Cat, which, like I said, was based off of an old existing Tarzan mold just repainted. There were 2 vehicles, the Battle Ram and the Wind Raider, and of course, the awesome Castle Grayskull. Also released around this time was the exclusive figure Wondar. We'll get into that whole thing in a different episode. We have a whole episode planned where we will get to talk about that. Now, the figures typically came with weapons, sometimes a shield or armor. They're just great figures, to be honest. You can find them, still pretty prevalent to find them on the market, especially loose. A loose incomplete figure will cost you like $5 to $10, depending on who it is. But with all their goodies attached, you're looking closer to $30 to $75. And in box, we're talking $90 and up. And I mean a lot, depending on what character or vehicle. Prices subject to change. So again, what happened to this hit toy line? Well, a few things have been attributed to the demise of the original run. Mostly oversaturation of less popular characters and not enough of the ones kids actually wanted. This actually led to a bunch of unsold toys in stores. Then there was the 1987 film, which was a complete and utter disaster. Half-assed story, corner cutting on effects. It really pissed off a lot of kids who were excited to see the movie. And when we did, we were like, hey, what is this crap? This sucks. Finally, there was just a shift in kids' likes. I mean, fantasy stuff was drifting away from the zeitgeist, and kids were moving on. Sad, I know, but shit happens. So I'm a vintage toy collector, and I loved He-Man back in the day, but I haven't actually started back into collecting this line yet. I say yet because I fully intend to, and that's probably going to change soon. But how about you guys? I know we have some major collectors out there, and we'd love to hear all about you and your collection. I want to give a quick shout out, like I tend to do here on the show. I want to mention Eternia Royalty on Instagram. This collection is crazy and just a really cool collection to look at and see. So please head over to Instagram, Eternia Royalty, check it out. I mean, because this is just one of those collections you need to see. It's amazing. Oh, and while you're over on Instagram, I mean, you can feel free to follow me. This is mine right here if you want to follow me on Instagram. Oh, and also, by the power of YouTube, please hit subscribe. Thank you. So I want to thank everybody for joining us here once again as we talk toys. Hopefully you're all having a really good time. I know I am. I can't wait to open the toy box again next week to pull out a new toy to talk about. And guys, until then, I want you to remember one thing. When it comes to retro, fantasy, awesome toys like these, the hunt, well, that's half the fun.